coming to Monton was a revelation to me. I went with my husband Ian, who's the late Ian Kidman, and we had the most splendid time. Working in Villa Solabella gave me a very strong sense of Catherine Mansfield and the way that she had lived in that town and the way that it had influenced her and the way that those late stories of hers would have an influence on New Zealand writing for decades to come and still does.
It was a great honour to be given the fellowship and to have the chance to spend time in Monton where Catherine Mansfield lived. I stayed just up the road from the villa and walked down there every day to write in the studio below the house. I was also very conscious of all the writers who'd been there before. It felt like a place of ghosts, but in a good way.
It does feel quite extraordinary, and at the time, I mean, it was such an honour to be given the award. And what I loved about being there was that awareness of the people who'd come before me. When I got to the room, there's an old dresser there, and I pulled open the bottom drawer, and there were a knife and a fork and a hot plate there, and I realised that they must have belonged to Janet Frame, who, when she was there, she had to live in the room. There was no other accommodation provided. And so here were these objects that she had cooked with every day and lived within the room. It was just a wonderful sense in that room of her and the other people who had been there previously.
Well, I've always thought that the Mahana family that I write about is the equivalent of Catherine Mansfield's Burnell family. So really what I was trying to do with my work throughout my career was to try to recreate, but from a Māori perspective, a Māori family growing up in New Zealand, just as she was a Pākehā family in New Zealand.
I went to Monton to write a memoir. For a long time I had been thinking that I'd like to put down some of the things that had happened to me in my life. It resonated very strongly with the place that I had grown up in Northland, Kirikiri, which was a citrus town in my day. So when I got to Monton, there was this very strong sense of the citrus town and the scents and smells of my growing up place. As an inspiration, it was the perfect place to go. Suddenly, after 17 years silence of writing poems, I began to write poems again, and that resulted in a collection called Where Your Left Hand Rests.
Dad was supposed to come with me because I had a book that I was wanting to write called The Dream Swimmer, which was a sequel to The Matriarch, and Dad has always been my library. But at the last minute, he decided that Mum needed him on the farm, and so he decided that he wouldn't come. So there I was stuck there, wanting to do this book, but then with Dad not there, I knew I couldn't do it. So I was in a car with one of the Monton people, and we passed this gypsy caravan, and I thought to myself, I could write a book about Māori gypsies, and so I wrote Bully Basha.
I worked mainly on one novel, my novel Yellow Palace, and it was really great to have that intense time to work. The thing I appreciated most about living in Monton was the colours, particularly the oranges and the yellows of the fruit, which is what I wrote about. Every day there was new beauty to see. I think that's what I've carried away with me, coming back to New Zealand afterwards. The memory of the intense sun and the lush green and the colours of the fruit, which were everywhere on the ground, and the trees, the colours of the houses as well.
When I was in Monton, I wrote a book of poems called Summer, which was like, I suppose it's almost a diary-like book of the time there, and it finishes with a long sort of rambling poem that's quite narrative in form. So that was the last poem in summer, and I actually used that poem as the first poem in my next book because it actually kicked off a whole way of writing that I got completely involved in. So it was quite significant for me.
Do you know the Mediterranean is such a magnificent place to be in? I mean, the sun, the sea, the swallows every morning and every night coming backwards and forwards, the gentility of the people. And there were times when I would look out across that Mediterranean Sea and just think, tomorrow I think I'll go and swim to Africa. So it was kind of like a place where I grew up, grew out, expanded my boundaries and dreamt a little wider and longer. And I think therefore that Menton became one of those places and times in my life that I will always look back to in terms of the evolution of this accidental career.
I was inspired by the whole thing of being away from New Zealand Aotearoa. It gave me distance and perspective, I think, on the country I'd come from. I loved being warm all the time. I loved being sitting on the balcony at Palais Laetitia, drinking rosé wine at the wrong time of day, and just generally the sense of smell and scents and the people, and that was a very strong inspiration.
It's a strange thing to be a New Zealand writer in France like that because you are adrift. But I did get the chance, as do all the fellows, to have a little welcome ceremony in the town hall where you're ceremoniously handed a big key. And at that I got to speak in English, in quite poor French, and in Te Reo Māori. And also my husband and I sing a waiata. It was a reminder of how different we are, how very different we are, and how important this kind of exchange is, this kind of cultural exchange, where you are bringing something of Aotearoa New Zealand into France. And I think for me, being able to visit schools, visit a university, meet lots of people and talk to them was a really essential part of the residency.
I walked every day to the writing room. It was about 45 minutes, and I passed through, I'd go through the new bit of town and then the old bit of town, and then I'd go down to the waterfront and there'd be people setting up for the summer season, all the tables and cafes, and there was the beach there, and then I'd get to the writing room. And so those different stages actually, I think they informed that final last poem in summer, which actually is a bit like going on a walk, really.
I kind of gauged to myself, if I go to Europe, then I will be able to understand how Europeans are and how they feel and what they do and how they think and how they cry. And that it was important to know that so that I could then, in my own work, recreate for them exactly the same sense of what Māori feel, how Māori are, and what makes us cry, which is, of course, for the whenua.
When we arrived in Menton, it was quite late on a Saturday night, and we were greeted at the place we'd rented by William Waterfield, who was a true character of Menton. And the next morning he picked us up to take us down to the local market. But William was quite eccentric, and when he was parking to let us go around the market, as he reversed into the parking space, he said, "Beep, beep, beep." It made me laugh so much, and there was an eccentricity to William and an eccentricity to the place, actually, full of characters that just makes me smile every time I remember it.
When Ian and I first arrived in Menton, we were given the key to the Villa Solabella, and that was given to us in a ceremony in the town hall. And the person who was presiding over that was the deputy mayor, a man called Monsieur Luke Lanlow. And Luke, one of his jobs in the town was also to marry people. And so when he'd done the key ceremony, my husband jokingly said to him, "Oh, you can marry us again if you like. And he said, oh, just a minute, please. And he disappeared, and the next minute he appeared wearing his official things for marrying people. And before I knew it, and without necessarily my permission, I was married for a second time by Luke Ludlow. So then we were marched down, the bells were rung, the wedding bells were rung, the doors opened onto the town. Oh, that's right, and I'd been given a big bouquet to go with the key, you see, so I was holding a big bouquet, the bells were ringing, and people started gathering outside Town Hall to applaud us because we were newly married. So that was quite funny. And Luke, who is a wonderful man and has since died, he remained our friend, and we had amazing times there.
I think the French really value dailiness. You know, they have these rituals that we don't really have here, things like the daily walk to the market to get the bread, vegetables and fruit. And that's a very social as well as being a necessary ritual. And there are a lot of elderly people in Monton, in those villages. It was quite lovely to have that mix of people.
I just had the most splendid time in France. The food, the culture, the whole environment was an amazing experience for me. It was a life-changing experience.
The lemon tree grew just outside my bedroom window. I was 15 then, and you, sister, were 13. You probably don't remember now. Our farm was surrounded by fruit trees, apple, orange, peach, nectarine, fig, lemon, feijoa, guava, and even loca. Grapes, blackberries, and gooseberries grew on the vines. The lemons were very bitter, but our mother said, of all the fruit in the orchard, the lemon is the most useful. You can flavour a cake with it, or make a cool drink, wash your hair in lemon, and the tresses will shine. I was in Monton a few years ago, sister, and I discovered the town celebrated Les Citons de Monton. Remember? I wrote to you about the festival, and I also thought, but our mother never knew about another use for lemons, and that is that you and I could send secret messages to each other.
In late February 2019, we arrive in Monton, its trees brazen with oranges and lemons, fallen fruit slippery on the pavements. Shop windows display clémentine confite and tranche citron orange, or expensive orange shoes stuffed with expensive yellow socks. The town is a fantasy garden with giant floats under assembly, each a garish mountain of citrus. There will be a parade, we hear, and fireworks on the seafront. Although it's winter and dark early, the parade doesn't begin until 9 p.m. We're warned, at the tourist office perhaps, or by our English landlady, to arrive at least an hour in advance to go through security. But an hour isn't enough. This is France. There are no orderly queues. Tented security encampments appear swarmed on all sides. Crowds press in at shuffle pace. People seem neither patient nor impatient. I fret that we'll miss the start of the parade, and we do. But the mood is one of simultaneous calm and chaos.
It was spring when we arrived in the town, that town of Monton. When we stepped off the train in the late afternoon sunlight, I smelled it, the scent of citrus flowers, like a heavy, languorous, invisible carpet. In an instant, I was transported back to my childhood, because that is a fragrance I grew up alongside. My childhood was spent in citrus country on the other side of the world, in a tiny town in the far north of Aotearoa, where the main industry was growing oranges and lemons to be sent to market down south. And here, that same wall of perfume was waiting for me, unexpected, intense, disturbing. I lay down that night in the Palais Lutetia and dreamed of my mother.
It came unbidden, the lemon. Sound was the focus. A car far off, a plane, birds, music from downstairs. I listened. What came was the sound of her voice, her mouth as it shaped the fruit. She was the train line, the market, her hand brightening the space between us, the passage of le citron, the lemon.